My name is Brianna Cole. I'm 34, female, and a single mom to the most amazing 8-year-old girl you'll ever meet. Her name is Sophie, and she is the only reason I'm still standing after the last few years. 2 years ago, I lost my husband, Daniel. Cancer. Stage 4. Pancreatic. The kind where doctors talk in months, not years. The kind that turns time into a countdown you can't stop, no matter how hard you beg. We were together for 12 years, met in college, married at 24, had Sophie at 26. Daniel was my entire world, and watching him fade away over 8 brutal months was the hardest thing I've ever done. The chemo made him sick. The radiation made him tired. The pain medication made him foggy. But he never complained. He never asked, why me? He just kept fighting for every extra day he could get with Sophie. Daniel was an artist, but not the starving kind. He did custom furniture restoration and woodworking. He had this little workshop in our garage where he'd spend hours bringing broken antiques back to life. People would bring him chairs with busted legs, water-damaged tables, dressers that had been in families for generations. He'd return them looking brand new while somehow keeping every scratch and dent that told their story. But his real passion? Model ships. Not the cheap plastic kind. I'm talking intricate wooden sailing vessels that took months to complete. Tall ships with billowing sails, warships with tiny cannons, merchant vessels with detailed cargo holds. Our house was full of them before he got sick, each displayed in a custom case he'd built himself. Each one months of patience and obsession. I used to watch him build them. He'd spend an hour adjusting one tiny rope pulley, then another hour painting details so small you needed a magnifying glass to even notice them. I'd tease him, ask why he wasted time on things nobody would see. He'd smile and say, "The ship will know. Doing things right matters, even when nobody's watching." After the diagnosis, after the screaming and the bargaining and that horrible silence when you realize there's nothing left to negotiate, Daniel made a decision. He was going to spend every moment he had strength for working on one final project. One last ship. Not for display, not for sale. For Sophie, a replica of an 1800s merchant ship, a gift for her 8th birthday. He knew he wouldn't be there to see it, so he poured everything he had left into it. He started the week after his diagnosis. For 6 months between treatments, he worked through pain and exhaustion and nausea. The chemo made his hands shake, so he'd wait for the rare, good hours, usually late at night. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning and find his side of the bed empty. I knew exactly where he'd be. In the garage, bent over the workbench, hands trembling, still carefully placing tiny brass fittings or painting the hull with a brush that had like 3 hairs. "Daniel," I'd whisper, leaning in the doorway, "please, you need to rest. The ship can wait." He'd look up, eyes already starting to look too big for his face, voice thin but steady. "I don't have time to wait, Bree," he'd say. "Every day I can work is a day I can give her. I need to finish this before I'm too weak to hold the tools." The ship was a masterpiece, 18 inches long. Every plank, hand-carved from basswood, he'd been saving for something special. The sails were vintage linen he'd found at an estate sale years ago, cut and sewn with stitches so tiny they looked machine-made. The rigging was done with rope he'd waxed himself, each line running through brass pulleys he'd ordered from some specialty supplier in England. He spent hours on his laptop looking up historical documents, old photographs, making sure every detail was period accurate. Tiny cargo barrels, turned on a miniature lathe, a ship's wheel with spokes so thin I was afraid to breathe near it. Even the anchor worked, with a miniature chain you could actually raise and lower. The hull took him 3 months on its own. He carved each plank individually, then stained them in graduated shades so it looked like the ship had weathered years at sea. On the days when the nausea was too bad to work, he'd just sit in the workshop, running his fingers over the wood, whispering plans for what he'd do when he felt better. He even made a custom glass display case. Dovetailed corners. Solid walnut base. He was so weak by then that I had to cut the wood for him, but he insisted on doing the joinery himself. "This is the last thing I'll ever make," he said, voice barely above a breath. "It has to be perfect." The final touch was a brass plaque, engraved by a local shop. Daniel spent days deciding what to put on it. In the end, it read, "For my brave Captain Sophie, sail toward your dreams. Love always, Dad." He finished the ship 3 weeks before he died. I remember coming home from work one evening and finding him in the workshop, leaning against the bench. The ship sat sealed in its case under the bright overhead light. He was crying and smiling at the same time. "It's done," he whispered. "It's perfect. She's going to love it." He made me promise I'd give it to Sophie on her 8th birthday. "Not before," he said. "She needs to be old enough to understand what it means, to see the work in it, and not after. I want her birthday to be special. I want her to know I was thinking about her future, even when I was dying." Then he laughed, this fragile sound that broke me in half. "Besides," he added, "if you give it to her too early, she'll try to sail it in the bathtub." After he died, I wrapped the case in soft cloth and hid it in the back of my closet. For 2 years, that ship sat in the dark while life stumbled forward without him. I went back to work. I figured out bills. I learned how to sleep on one side of a too-big bed. Sophie learned how to talk about her dad without crying every time. We learned a new kind of normal neither of us had asked for. And all that time, that ship waited. Every time I opened the closet and caught a glimpse of the walnut base, my heart clenched. It was like having a loaded moment tucked between winter coats and old shoeboxes, a time bomb made of wood and glass and love. This year, Sophie turned 8. I started planning months in advance. A small party, just family. The ship as the centerpiece. I pictured her face when she saw it, how her eyes would light up, how she'd whisper that Dad made it just for her. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Everything was finally coming together. And then my brother found a way to destroy it in 15 seconds. To understand why what happened that day broke something in me that can't be fixed. You need to understand my family. Specifically, you need to understand Tyler. Tyler is 31 and has never grown out of being the golden child who thinks consequences are something that happen to other people. Our parents had 2 kids. Me, the responsible one. The one who followed the rules, got good grades, got a stable job, married young, had a family, paid my own way. And then there's Tyler, the free spirit, the creative, the one who, in my mother's words, just needs a little extra support while he figures things out. The favoritism started early. I had strict curfews. If I was 1 minute late, I was grounded. I needed straight A's, or we had serious talks about motivation and discipline. When I wanted a car, I worked part-time all through high school and still had to pay my own insurance. Tyler? He rolled in whenever he felt like it. Barely passed his classes, if he passed at all. If a teacher complained, my mom would say they just didn't understand his energy. When he turned 16, our parents handed him keys to a used car and paid for everything, gas, insurance, repairs, because it wouldn't be safe for him to take the bus. That set the tone. He's the kind of guy who shows up to family events empty-handed, then leaves with a container of leftovers and cash for gas. The kind who borrows tools and never returns them. I've lost 3 power drills and my grandfather's vintage level to Tyler's black hole of good intentions. The kind who thinks his charm will get him out of any situation because it always has. Mom enables him, Dad finances the enabling. When Tyler got fired from 3 jobs in 1 year, it was because his bosses didn't appreciate his creativity. When he totaled his car doing 90 in a 45, they bought him a newer model than mine, so he'd be safer next time. When he got evicted for misunderstanding that rent money and Vegas trips were not interchangeable, they let him move back home rent-free at 30. Meanwhile, I'd been paying my own bills since I was 18. Then there were the business ventures, dropshipping, crypto trading, a food truck, a consulting brand. Every year, a new scheme. Every time, he convinced my parents it was his big break. Every time, they handed over money like the universe owed him success. Last time I did the mental math, they'd funneled over $60,000 into Tyler's startups. Not one made a cent. The pattern was always the same. Tyler screwed up. Mom made excuses. Dad wrote a check. I was expected to quietly applaud how hard he was trying. When I pointed out the unfairness, I was being jealous, bitter, unsupportive. "You're doing fine, Brianna," Mom would say. "Tyler just needs more help than you do." Isn't that what family is for? Apparently, family was for funding Tyler's disasters, but not for helping me when I actually needed it. When Daniel and I bought our first house, we saved for years. We celebrated with takeout and tap water in mismatched glasses. My parents showed up with a $15 towel set from a discount store and a lecture about not taking on too much debt. When Tyler wanted to start his food truck, they handed him $25,000 and called it a loan, even though everyone knew it would never be repaid. When Daniel got sick, Tyler visited the hospital once. He stayed 15 minutes, spent 10 of them staring at his phone. "Hospitals make me uncomfortable," he said, shrugging. "You know how I am." Then he left. Never came back. He didn't show up for the funeral either. He texted me 3 days after we buried my husband to say, "Sorry I couldn't make it. Had a business opportunity I couldn't pass up. Hope you understand." I didn't respond. Over time, I learned how to manage my exposure. Minimal contact. Surface level politeness at holidays. Don't tell him anything important. Don't give him access to anything fragile. Possessions, emotions, boundaries. Don't give him leverage. But this year was Sophie's 8th birthday. And for some reason, some stupid, naive part of me thought, he wouldn't ruin this. Not this. I should have known better. The plan was simple. A small party at our house, just family and one close friend for Sophie. My parents, my Aunt Lisa, Sophie's best friend from school, and her mom. That was it. The ship would be the finale, the big reveal. I'd spent weeks rehearsing it in my mind. The way I'd bring out the covered case, set it on the table, kneel beside Sophie. The words I'd say about her dad, how he'd worked on it for months, how he'd poured every ounce of love into every detail, how he'd done it knowing he wouldn't be there to see her open it. I wanted it to be a moment she'd carry for the rest of her life, a moment that stitched something back together inside her. But there was one obstacle I could see from a mile away. My mother. The week before the party, she called me while I was in the grocery store, trying to remember if I'd already grabbed the candles. "So," she said in that too bright tone that always meant trouble, "what time should Tyler get there?" I stopped in the baking aisle. I wasn't planning to invite Tyler. Silence, then a sharp inhale. "Brianna." "He barely knows Sophie," I said quietly. "He hasn't seen her in months. He didn't show up for Daniel. I don't want drama on her birthday." "You can't exclude your own brother from his niece's party." "He excluded himself," I shot back before I could stop myself. "Years ago." Mom ignored that. "He's been really down lately," she said. "The bike show didn't go the way he hoped, and he's under a lot of stress. This would mean a lot to him." I almost laughed. "Her birthday is not emotional rehab for Tyler," I said. "It's about Sophie, and I don't want him near Daniel's ship. You know what he's like with other people's stuff." Mom's voice dropped into that wounded, trembling register she uses when she wants to push guilt into my bloodstream. "You're being cruel," she said. "Tyler would be devastated, and Sophie will notice if her uncle isn't there. Do you want to explain to her why her family can't even be in the same room for her birthday?" I closed my eyes, hand tightening around the cart handle. What I wanted was to say, yes. I want to explain that some people hurt us and don't get access to us anymore. What I said instead was, "I don't want a scene." "There won't be a scene," Mom said immediately, as if promising on his behalf meant anything. "I'll talk to him. I'll make sure he behaves. Please, Bree. He loves Sophie." He loved the idea of being the fun uncle when it got him attention. That wasn't the same thing. "If you don't invite him," she added softly, "I don't think I can come either. It wouldn't be right." There it was. The quiet threat. The condition. If I wanted my parents at my daughter's party, the price was letting Tyler in too. I stood there between cake mixes and frosting tubs, feeling that familiar squeeze in my chest. I could say no. I could hold the line. But then I pictured Sophie looking around on her birthday and asking why Grandma and Grandpa weren't there, asking what she'd done wrong, asking why, after losing her dad, she was losing more people. I sighed. "Fine," I said, "he can come." Mom's relief was immediate and overflowing. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "You'll see. He's really trying lately. This will be good for everyone." I hung up and put my phone back in my pocket. In the fluorescent light of the grocery store, the frosting labels swam in front of my eyes. I stared at a tub of vanilla buttercream, and all I could feel was this heavy, sinking dread. My brain whispered, "This is a mistake." My heart whispered, "She deserves a peaceful birthday." I told myself I was overreacting, that it was one afternoon, that even Tyler wouldn't be able to ruin something as sacred as this. That's the thing about people like my brother. You keep underestimating how far they'll go because you don't want to believe anyone could be that careless with other people's hearts. The day of the party, everything started out exactly the way I'd hoped. The house smelled like chocolate cake and lemon cleaner. Balloons bobbed gently in the living room. Sophie wore the blue dress Daniel had picked out before he died, the one she'd been saving for a special day. My parents arrived first, arms full of store-bought salad and a gift bag that already looked like an afterthought. Aunt Lisa came right after, carrying an actual present wrapped in careful paper and that look in her eyes, the one that said she was here for me as much as for Sophie. Sophie's best friend and her mom showed up with a handmade card and a shy smile. For a little while it felt normal. Kids laughing, adults chatting, cake being cut. I started to believe, just a little, that maybe my fears had been unnecessary. that maybe Tyler. The doorbell rang. My stomach dropped. I pasted on a polite smile and opened the door. Tyler stood there on my porch, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, a crooked grin on his face. No gift in his hands, just his phone and his keys. "Hey, sis," he said, leaning in for a hug I pretended not to see. "Happy birthday to the tiny human." I stepped aside to let him in. "Tyler," I said, "thanks for coming." He looked around the living room, eyes landing on the cake, the decorations, the guests. "Wow," he said, "you went all out." "This is nothing," I replied. "The real present is coming later." I didn't realize in that moment that those words were loaded, that in some twisted way, they were true. Because the real present was coming later. Just not the one Daniel planned. Not the one Sophie deserved. The one that would finally show me exactly how far my family would go to protect the golden child at any cost. The first hour of the party went smoothly. Suspiciously smoothly. Tyler mostly hovered by the snack table, scrolling on his phone, giving Sophie distracted thumbs-ups whenever she ran past. My parents kept shooting me these proud, see-we-told-you looks, as if his bare minimum civility was proof that he had matured. I wasn't relaxed, not really, but the knot in my stomach loosened just enough for me to breathe. Sophie was glowing, running around the living room with her best friend, laughing so hard she hiccuped. For a moment, I let myself believe this day really could be everything Daniel wanted it to be. Then, after cake and games and a chaotic round of pin the horn on the unicorn, I checked the time. It was almost 3:30. The moment had come. My heart started pounding. I slipped away to my bedroom, opened in the closet, and gently lifted out the walnut case, still wrapped in its soft cloth. Even covered, it felt sacred, heavy with meaning. When I walked back into the living room, the energy shifted. Aunt Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. My parents went very still. Even Sophie, mid-giggle, froze when she saw me holding something hidden beneath that cloth. She whispered, "Is that—" "It is," I said softly. I set the case carefully on the table. The room quieted so completely that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Sophie stepped closer, her fingers hovering above the cloth like she was afraid touching it would make it disappear. I knelt beside her. "This," I whispered, "is your dad's last gift to you. He worked on it for months, for you, for your 8th birthday. He wanted it to be something you could keep forever." Sophie's eyes filled with tears instantly. She blinked them back, trying so hard to be brave. Somewhere behind me, I heard my mom sniffle. Dad cleared his throat. Even Sophie's friend's mom looked moved, though she'd never met Daniel. I took a breath and lifted the cloth. The ship glowed under the afternoon light. The brass fittings sparkled. The white sails looked soft enough to breathe. The planks, each hand-carved, each stained by Daniel's trembling hands, had that warm, honeyed tone that only comes from love and obsession. Sophie made the smallest sound, a gasp that wasn't really a gasp, a cry that wasn't fully a cry. "Dad made this for me," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. Her tiny hands hovered over the glass. She touched it so gently, like her fingers might pass right through it. "He did," I managed. "Every detail. Even when he felt awful. Even when he was tired. He wanted you to have something beautiful. Something from him to you." Everyone was crying now, except Tyler. Of course. He stood near the back, arms crossed, head tilted like he was studying an item on clearance. He took a few steps forward. "Wow," he said loudly. "That's really something." The tone, God. It was the tone he used when he complimented a stranger's tacky decor or pretended to like a gift he planned to re-gift. I ignored him. But he didn't stop. "Must have taken forever," he added. "Too bad he wasted all that time on something so fragile." Aunt Lisa actually gasped. Sophie flinched. I stood up, heart-pounding, jaw tight. "Tyler," I said quietly, "don't." He smiled like I'd given him an opening. "Relax, Bree," he said, stepping closer to the table. "I just want to look at it." And before anyone could stop him, before I even registered what was happening, he reached out and grabbed the display case. Just lifted it straight off the table. Sophie yelped and reached for it instinctively. "Tyler, put it down," I said sharply. He laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on," he said, turning the case slightly in his hands. "It's fine. I'm just looking." But the ship inside shifted, tilted, slid in its mounts. "Stop!" Sophie cried. "Please, please don't!" Her voice broke on the last word. My daughter, who had cried herself hoarse the night Daniel died, sounded like she was shattering all over again. I stepped closer. "Put it down," I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "That is not a toy. That is the last thing Daniel ever made. It's priceless. Tyler waved a hand dismissively. You're being dramatic. I'm literally just... He tilted the case again. The ship slid violently inside. Sophie let out a cry that tore at something primal in me. I wasn't polite anymore. Put it down. He smirked. That smirk that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. Relax. You always get so possessive. Maybe you should learn to share. I mean, if it's really for Sophie. He lifted it higher, out of Sophie's reach. My daughter's voice cracked. Give it back. Please, please give it back. My mom finally spoke. Tyler, stop, sweetheart, put it down. But Tyler just raised his eyebrows like, see? Mom thinks it's fine. Dad stood frozen, jaw working uselessly. He had never once known what to do with Tyler except write checks and hope for the best. I saw it then, in Tyler's eyes. The same look he had when he accidentally deleted my college essays, when he accidentally told my boyfriend I was cheating, when he accidentally drove my car into a ditch and blamed it on faulty brakes. That look, the one that meant he was about to do something terrible and pretend it wasn't his fault. I lunged. Tyler stepped back. His foot caught on the edge of the rug, and the world slowed down. His arms pinwheeled, the case lifted higher. Sophie screamed, this raw animal sound I'd never heard from her. My heart stopped. The room seemed to tilt. Then gravity took hold. The case flew. It arced through the air. And then, crash. The sound was like a car accident in miniature. Glass exploded across the hardwood. The ship, Daniel's last gift, his final months of life carved into wood, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The mast snapped, the hull split, the sails tore. Sophie screamed again, louder, collapsing to her knees and reaching for the fragments. No, 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 no. Daddy's ship. Daddy's... Aunt Lisa rushed forward to stop her, but Sophie was already cutting her hands on the glass, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I grabbed her, pulling her into my arms. She fought me at first, desperate to reach the pieces until she finally gave up and melted against me, shaking violently. Behind me, Tyler brushed glass off his jeans. He looked annoyed. Annoyed. Jesus, he muttered. It was an accident. Floors in here are uneven. Not my fault. Not his fault. Not his fault. My ears rang. My parents were speechless. Aunt Lisa was crying. Sophie's friend's mom was already shepherding both kids toward the door. I think we should go, she whispered, her eyes wide with horror. I couldn't speak, but I looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and something inside me, something that had bent for 34 years, finally snapped clean. Get out, I said. Tyler blinked. What? Bree, it was an accident. Out. My voice shook the air. Dad opened his mouth. Brianna, let's talk. Get out, all of you. Sophie was sobbing into my shirt. My hands were sticky with her blood from the cuts on her palms. Everything smelled like glass dust and lemon cleaner and heartbreak. My mom started crying. Brianna, he didn't mean to... Leave. Tyler scoffed, rolled his eyes. I swear you always overreact. I turned toward him, and whatever he saw on my face made him shut up instantly. Dad herded him toward the door. Mom followed, still crying. Aunt Lisa stayed back for a moment, whispering, Call me, before she slipped out, giving us space. The door closed. Silence rushed in. Except for Sophie, choking on her own sobs, her small body trembling in my arms. The ship, Daniel's ship, lay scattered across my floor like a crime scene. And as I held my daughter, feeling her heartbreak shake through her bones into mine, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Tyler had finally crossed a line that even my parents couldn't protect him from. And he had no idea what was coming. For a long time after the door slammed shut, the house was silent, except for Sophie's broken sobs. She cried so hard she made herself sick. Literal stomach-wrenching heaves that had me sprinting to grab a bowl. She clung to me with desperate, shaking hands, her fingers still dotted with tiny cuts from the glass. It's gone, she kept whispering, her voice strangled. Daddy's ship is gone. I didn't get to see it long enough. I didn't get to tell him thank you. Every word was a knife. I rocked her, murmuring whatever soothing sounds I could make around the tight, burning ache in my own throat. Eventually, after 2 episodes of vomiting and endless sobbing, her little body collapsed from exhaustion. She fell asleep on my lap on the couch, hiccuping in her dreams. I sat completely still, afraid that any movement would wake her, send her back into the loop of grief she was too small to understand. I stroked her hair and stared at the broken remains of the ship scattered across the floor. I didn't feel anger yet. Just a thick, suffocating numbness, the kind that comes right after the world shifts under your feet. But underneath the numbness, something else was building, slow and deep, A pressure, a burn, an awakening. A part of me that had been silent for years began whispering, "This time is different. This time, he hurt your child. This time, you don't let him walk away." When Sophie was finally settled upstairs, her hand wrapped in gauze, her cheeks streaked with tear lines, I returned to the living room. It looked like a wrecked museum exhibit. Glass glittered under the lamplight, catching the warm glow like tiny shards of a dead star. Splinters of basswood were scattered everywhere, some no bigger than grains of sand. The delicate linen sails were torn, tangled, stained with dirt. The carefully waxed rigging cords lay in twisted heaps. And at the center of it all, fragmented, crushed, unrecognizable, were the remains of the hull Daniel spent months shaping with trembling hands. I sank to my knees. For the next 4 hours, I worked in complete silence, not because I was calm, God, no, but because grief sometimes demands silence. It demands reverence. With tweezers and gloved hands, I picked up every shard of glass, every splinter of wood. I sorted them into piles, pieces that might, maybe, be salvageable, pieces too ruined to save, sails that could be mended, sails that were beyond repair. The brass fittings were everywhere, rolling under furniture, hidden under rugs, embedded in debris. I collected them one by one, placing them into small zip-top bags. The hull, I didn't even recognize it at first. The brake lines ran right along the plank seams Daniel had spent weeks perfecting. The front bow was cracked nearly in half. The stern was crushed flat where the display case had fallen hardest. I found the tiny carved barrels flattened, the ship's wheel broken into splinters, the anchor chain curled like a severed nerve. But then I found the plaque. The brass plaque, dented in one corner, but intact, still readable. For my brave Captain Sophie. Sail toward your dreams. Love always, Dad. Seeing those words, Daniel's last message to our daughter, hit me harder than anything else that day. My breath cracked. I pressed the plaque against my chest and finally felt the numbness split open, releasing something hot, shaking, volcanic. I cried for Daniel, for Sophie, for myself, for the gift that was supposed to heal us and now was just another scar. It took a long time before the tears stopped. When they did, something inside me had shifted, hardened. I stared at the ruined ship, and what rose inside me was not just grief. It was clarity. This didn't have to happen. Tyler made it happen, and everyone would have excused him. Again. If I let them. I thought about the years of accidents, the ruined essays, the lies he'd told my boyfriends, the tools he'd stolen, the car he destroyed, the money he drained from my parents' retirement fund, the way he didn't show up for Daniel, the way he didn't show up for Sophie, the way he casually destroyed the last thing Daniel ever made, for attention, for ego, for a laugh. And the worst part? The part that made something cold settle deep in my bones? He wasn't sorry, not even close. He was annoyed, confused I wasn't laughing it off, offended that I demanded accountability. I stared at the wreckage and felt something inside me lock into place with terrifying certainty. This time, he doesn't get to walk away unscathed. This time, he learns what loss feels like. This time, I am not forgiving, not forgetting, not letting him ruin my child's heart without consequence. My parents would never hold him accountable. They never had. They never would. So the responsibility fell to me. And as I picked through the ruins of Daniel's final gift, I formed a plan, slowly at first, then with sharp, growing precision. I needed to know one thing. What does Tyler love? What does Tyler value more than anything? What could he not bear to lose? The answer wasn't money. He'd never earned enough to care. It wasn't relationships. He'd burned through those long ago. It wasn't pride. He had too much to feel it. But there was one thing. One single thing in Tyler's life that he treated with actual reverence, that he cared for, maintained, bragged about, protected. My phone buzzed on the dining table, pulling me out of my thoughts. A text from Aunt Lisa. "Call me when you're ready. I'm here." I stared at the message, then at the shattered ship, then back at the message. I wiped my eyes, took a breath, and made the call. When she answered, her voice was soft but steady. "Brianna, are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I know what I need to do." A pause, a rustle on her end. Then, quietly, "What do you need?" I swallowed. "What's the one thing Tyler cares about more than anything else?" She knew immediately. Her answer came without hesitation. "The motorcycle." Her voice dropped even lower. "The Triumph. The vintage one he inherited from your grandfather." I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course that was it. The only thing Tyler had ever truly loved. The only thing he'd ever treated with care. the only thing he'd never destroyed or mismanaged. Grandpa's motorcycle, worth over $20,000. His pride and joy, his identity, his trophy, his connection to a man who actually believed in him. Tyler had protected that bike with his life, which made it perfect. A slow, steady calm settled over me. "Do you," I said carefully, "still have the spare key to my parents' house?" Another pause. Then,
Yes, I do.
"Would you be willing to let me borrow it for a few hours while they're out?" Aunt Lisa was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "What are you planning, Brianna?" I told her. "Not the details, just enough." She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She didn't try to talk me out of it. When I finished, she exhaled slowly, then said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and looked around the living room one last time, at the glass, at the splinters, at the ghost of what the ship once was. Then I picked up the brass plaque and closed my hand around it. Tyler had taken something irreplaceable from Sophie. Next, I would take something irreplaceable from him. Not out of pettiness, not out of spite, not out of cruelty, but because he needed to learn that destroying precious things has consequences. Because I needed to show Sophie that her pain mattered. And because, for the first time in my life, I was done letting my brother break things and walk away untouched. 3 days after the disaster, everything aligned. My parents texted the family group chat that they were taking Tyler to a motorcycle show 2 hours away, an all-day event. They'd be leaving early in the morning. They invited me and Sophie as if they had completely forgotten the blood, the screams, the shattered glass on my living room floor. I declined politely. Mom sent back a passive-aggressive, "You can't avoid us forever." I ignored it, because I wasn't avoiding them. I was planning. The moment I saw my dad's car pull out of their driveway on the home security feed Aunt Lisa helped me access, my pulse steadied. I waited 30 more minutes, just to be sure. Then I grabbed a toolbox, a tarp, a pair of gloves, and a cardboard box, loaded everything into my SUV, and drove to my parents' house. The sky was overcast, muted gray, the kind that makes the world feel paused. Perfect conditions, quiet, cool, discreet. My hands were steady. My heart was not. The garage code was still my birthday. 0824. Of course it was. My parents changed nothing unless it directly inconvenienced Tyler. The door rumbled open, revealing the shrine at its center. The Triumph, a 1970 Triumph Bonneville 650. Glossy black paint, gold hand-painted pinstriping, chrome polished so clean it reflected the garage ceiling like water. Leather seats soft from constant conditioning. Every original part preserved, maintained, worshipped by Tyler as though it were a living relic. It was beautiful. Even I, who had never understood Tyler's obsessions, felt a pang at how pristine it was, how lovingly tended. It was everything Daniel's ship had been to him, except Tyler's care was real, his only real effort in life. Grandpa had bought that bike new, spent decades riding it, polishing it, teaching Tyler how to maintain it. When he passed, the will left it specifically to Tyler. The only time I'd ever seen my brother cry without theatrics was during the reading of that will. And now the Triumph sat in the center of the garage like an altar, cars shoved to the sides to give it space. A custom $200 fitted dust cover draped over it like a silk robe. I pulled the cover off. It slid to the floor, and the bike gleamed. For a moment, one brief, human moment, I hesitated. My throat tightened. Daniel would have hated revenge. He would have told me to rise above it, to forgive. But Daniel wasn't here. Sophie was. Sophie with her small bandaged hands and her trembling voice whispering, "Why did Uncle Tyler break Daddy's ship?" And I realized, forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. Accountability is a debt you collect from others. Tyler owed us a debt. And today, I was collecting. I put on my gloves and got to work. I didn't smash anything. That would have been too obvious. And Tyler was too self-centered to ever imagine that a failure could be his own fault. I needed this to look natural. Random mechanical failure triggered by neglect, time, or bad luck. So instead of destruction, I chose precision. Methodical sabotage, deliberate, slow acting, undeniable. I started with the carburetor, an original Amal carburetor, impossible to replace without paying thousands at auction. Disconnecting it was simple. 8 bolts, 1 fuel line, a twist, a lift. I wrapped it in a shop towel and placed it gently into the cardboard box. Next, the ignition coil, gone. The starter motor, removed. The timing chain tensioner, unbolted. The oil pump, extracted. All of them vintage, all of them critical, all taken. Then I moved on to the cosmetic sabotage. I used a screwdriver to create small, hidden scratches under the seat and along the underside of the frame, areas Tyler wouldn't see until rust began spreading beneath the paint. Cosmetic damage that would bloom like decay. Next, structural sabotage. I slightly bent the kickstand with controlled pressure, not enough to snap it, just enough so the bike would never sit level again. I loosened bolts strategically. The front brake assembly, the chain guard, the handlebar mount, the exhaust fittings, just enough to cause rattles, instability, and eventual mechanical failure, but not enough to draw immediate suspicion. Then, the fuel system. I poured corn syrup into the gas tank, not sugar. Sugar would be obvious. Corn syrup would gum up slowly, coating the carburetor, which was gone, clogging lines, causing misfires, engine choking, black smoke, untraceable sabotage. Finally, I took the custom-fitted dust cover, the one Tyler bragged about costing more than your monthly groceries, and cut 3 subtle holes. One near the seat, where rainwater could seep in. One near the tank, invisible unless lifted. One on the underside, where dust and moisture would accumulate. Death by 1,000 cuts. It took an hour and a half. An hour and a half to dismantle the only thing in Tyler's life he ever valued. When I finished, I looked around the garage. Everything was exactly where it had been. No mess, no signs of intrusion, no dramatic vandalism. Just a bike that looked perfect, but wasn't. I covered it again, smoothing the fabric like a funeral shroud. Then I picked up the cardboard box full of dismantled vintage parts, thousands of dollars of machinery and history, and carried it to my car. I locked the garage, reset the alarm, closed the door, drove away. My heart beat hard but steady. There was no guilt, only certainty. I drove 40 minutes to a scrapyard 3 towns over, the kind of place where paperwork is optional and questions aren't asked. A man in grease-stained overalls approached my trunk. "What you got?" "Garage clean-out," I said. He grunted, took the box, and dumped its contents into a metal bin with a deafening clatter. The sound made my chest tighten, not with regret, but with something dark and clean and final. The man handed me $40. I didn't take it. "Keep it," I said, turning back to my car. As I drove home, the clouds finally broke, letting soft sunlight spill across the road. The world suddenly seemed clearer, sharper, balanced. That night, Sophie slept with her newly washed stuffed rabbit tucked against her cheek. I kissed her forehead, tucked her in, and felt something inside me shift again, a protective instinct settling into place like armor. Tyler had taken from her without a thought. Now he would learn that taking has consequences. All that was left was to wait. And the waiting would not take long. The first sign came 3 days later. A buzzing notification in the family group chat, one I'd muted long ago. "Tyler, anyone know why a bike would lose power randomly? Mine's acting weird." Mom replied instantly, like she'd been waiting for a chance to swoop in. "Mom, sweetheart, did you put in the wrong gas? Maybe it's just old." I closed the chat without responding. It wasn't my concern. Not yet. A week later, the second sign arrived. Another text from Tyler, this time angrier. "Tyler, mechanic says some parts look tampered with. Missing pieces even. They're trying to scam me." Dad chimed in. "Dad, I'll go with you for a second opinion. Don't pay for anything until I see it." Of course, Dad to the rescue, again. I didn't respond. Aunt Lisa did. Aunt Lisa. "Missing parts? That sounds serious." I smiled. She was stirring the pot quietly, subtly, an ally who understood the dance without needing any instructions. Another few days. Another message. This time just a rant. "Tyler, this is Bull's gig. Mechanic number 2 says there's internal damage. Paint bubbling under the seat? How the hell is that possible?" Oh, it was possible. Very possible. Mom called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to her strained, breathy attempt at concern. "Brianna, your brother is really upset. His motorcycle is important to him. I know you've been distant lately, but, well, we all need to support each other. Call me back." I didn't. By week 3, the panic had set in. Tyler sent a long, rambling text that ended with, "I swear someone messed with my bike. This isn't normal. Missing parts, bad fuel flow, loosened bolts. Something's wrong." Yes, Tyler. Something was very, very wrong. Then came the climax. A furious voicemail. Tyler yelling so loudly I had to lower the volume. "The whole fuel system is shot. The second mechanic said there's damage everywhere. Some parts aren't even original anymore. Insurance won't cover it because they think it's suspicious. I need answers. This is thousands of dollars. If someone messed with my bike, I'll find out who and they'll pay for it." I listened to the voicemail twice, not because I enjoyed his rage, But because that rage was the clearest proof that he finally understood something he had never understood before. Loss. Real loss. Irreversible loss. Loss that couldn't be excused, joked away, or repaired with Dad's checkbook. A few days later, he sold the bike. Sold it. The triumph he worshipped. The one thing he'd ever truly cared for. A restoration specialist in Tennessee bought it for $2,800, a humiliating fraction of its original value. He had to pay $400 to ship it. Net gain, $2,400 for a $20,000 heirloom. When Aunt Lisa told me, her voice was steady. But I could hear the satisfaction beneath it. Not joy, not cruelty. Just justice settling into place. That evening, Sophie and I were frosting cookies when someone knocked on the door. 3 sharp knocks. Then 2 more. Anxious. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. But I did anyway. Tyler stood on the porch, breathing hard, jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. His eyes were bloodshot, whether from crying or screaming, I didn't know and didn't care. I opened the door just enough to step outside and close it behind me so Sophie wouldn't hear. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. He didn't waste time. "You did something to my bike." His voice trembled, not with fear, with fury. With the missing parts, the messed up fuel system, the loose bolts. Don't you dare pretend you don't know. You're the only person who hates me enough to do something like this. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I simply tilted my head slightly and said, "Do you have proof?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "No," he snapped. "But—" "No cameras?" I asked. "No eyewitnesses? No signs of forced entry? No fingerprints?" Silence. He looked lost. Small. "Why would you do that?" he whispered, voice cracking. "It was Grandpa's bike. It was important to me." Ah, there it was. Emotion. Real emotion. For something he'd lost. Not the daughter who cried over the shattered remains of her father's last gift. Not the sister who had spent decades cleaning up after him. Not the man she'd loved, whose memory he'd mocked. No, the bike. The only thing he'd ever valued enough to cherish. I stepped closer, my voice soft, almost gentle. "Important to you," I echoed. "Like Daniel's ship was important to Sophie?" He swallowed hard. Color drained from his face. "Things break sometimes," I continued, using his exact words from the party. "Accidents happen. Maybe you shouldn't get so possessive. Maybe this is a learning experience about how fragile important things can be." His mouth fell open. His voice cracked. "You're seriously admitting you did this?" "I didn't admit anything. Brianna, that bike is gone," I said. "Just like Daniel's ship. Except unlike you, I'm not calling it a toy or telling you to get over it." He looked like he might collapse. Or scream. Or both. Instead, his voice turned low, trembling with rage. "I'll go to the police." "You should," I said calmly. "Tell them your vintage motorcycle mysteriously developed mechanical issues in your parents' locked garage, and you think your sister sabotaged it, even though you have no evidence whatsoever. See how fast they laugh." His eyes flickered. He knew. He knew exactly how ridiculous it would sound. "And even if you did prove it," I added, "you'd have to explain why I might have been motivated. You'd have to describe what you did at Sophie's birthday party, how you ignored her begging, how you mocked Daniel's work, how you destroyed a dying man's final gift to his 8-year-old daughter." He froze. "Completely." "If this goes public," I said softly, "you won't just lose your bike. You'll lose your reputation, your standing with our family, possibly your access to your niece. Think very carefully." He blinked rapidly, breath shaking. Finally, he whispered, You ruined my life." For the first time, I smiled. "No," I said, "you ruined Sophie's birthday, Daniel's legacy, and your own integrity. I just made sure you felt even a fraction of the consequences." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me, like he had never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. He turned without another word and walked to his car. Shoulders slumped, steps heavy. No performative dramatics, no arrogant swagger. Just defeat. Pure, simple, absolute defeat. His engine didn't roar as he drove away. It sputtered. Fitting. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, I sat on my couch holding the brass plaque from Daniel's ship, running my thumb over the engraved letters. "For my brave Captain Sophie. Sail toward your dreams. Love always, Dad." Justice wasn't revenge. Justice was balance. And for the first time in years, I felt the scale tilt back into place. Tyler didn't contact me again that night, or the next, but someone else did. At 6:42 the next morning, my phone lit up with an incoming call from Mom. I let it ring. She called again, then again. By the 4th attempt, she switched to voicemail, her voice already thick with tears. "Brianna, we just spoke to Tyler. He's devastated. That motorcycle was the only thing he had left from your grandfather. He's heartbroken. Please, please tell me you didn't have anything to do with this." I set the phone down on the counter and poured Sophie's cereal. I didn't owe Mom a response. Not anymore. But an hour later, after I dropped Sophie off at school, Mom called again. This time I answered, not because I wanted to, but because avoiding her would give her ammunition. I'd learned that much growing up. She didn't waste time. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, voice trembling. "Did you ruin your brother's bike?" I took a breath. "Why would you assume I did anything?" "Because he's convinced," she cried. "He's in agony. Brianna, that bike meant the world to him. You knew that." I closed my eyes. Of course. The tragedy wasn't the trauma Sophie endured. It wasn't Daniel's last gift, shattered across the floor. It wasn't the 8-year-old girl who cried herself sick, sobbing into my shoulder until her voice broke. No. The tragedy, in my mother's eyes, was Tyler losing a motorcycle. "Mom," I said calmly, "let's talk about what happened to Sophie." Silence. A tense waiting silence. "No," Mom said finally. "We are not rehashing that day. It was an accident. Tyler didn't—" "It wasn't an accident. He tripped." He grabbed the ship out of her hands. He held it over her head. He laughed while she begged him to stop. Mom inhaled sharply. "That's not what he meant to do." "That's what he did," I shot back. "Intent doesn't erase impact." She fell silent again. And for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was trying to explain. But then, "You know your brother," she whispered. Fragile, prohibited, her voice trembled. "He destroyed a dying man's mind and his daughter. Any harm he could," Mom said. "It was a horrible mistake, Vern. That doesn't justify destroying." "Are you hearing yourself?" I asked quietly. "Do you know how that sounds? That after everything he's done, the thing that finally outrages you is something happening to him?" "It was Grandpa's," she cried. "It had sentimental value." And that was when something inside me clicked into place. Not anger, not sadness. Understanding. Clear as glass. "You know what else had sentimental value?" I asked. "Daniel's ship. The last thing he ever made. The last piece of him Sophie will ever hold. But when Tyler destroyed it, you told me to calm down. You said accidents happen." That's different. There it was. The line that had shaped my entire childhood. The invisible rule. Tyler's pain matters. My pain is exaggerated. "No," I said softly. "It's not different. It's exactly the same. Except that Sophie is 8, and she will carry that memory for the rest of her life." Mom's breath shuddered. "Brianna, revenge isn't healthy. It corrodes people. You're teaching Sophie the wrong things. Anger, vindictiveness." "No," I interrupted. "I'm teaching her something you never taught me." "And what's that?" she asked bitterly. "That it's okay to protect yourself from people who hurt you, even if those people are family." Silence again. Heavy, vibrating, wounded. "Brianna," she whispered finally, "you're tearing the family apart." I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for years. "No," I said. "Tyler tore the family apart the moment he destroyed that ship and laughed while Sophie cried. You're overreacting." "Stop!" I said it so quietly she fell silent. "My daughter," I continued, "is not going to grow up thinking love means tolerating cruelty. She's not going to learn that being family gives you a free pass to hurt people. She's not going to learn that forgiveness must be automatic, even when remorse is non-existent." Mom made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you and Dad are welcome in my home," I replied. "You can see Sophie anytime." Relief flooded her voice. "Oh, thank God." "But," I added, "Tyler is not allowed here." Her relief shattered. "What?" she whispered. "You heard me. Tyler is not welcome. Not in my home. Not around Sophie." "You can't do that." "I already did." "He's your brother!" "And Sophie is my daughter. I choose her." Mom started crying outright. "You're forcing me to choose sides." "No," I said gently. "I'm just setting a boundary. You can choose however you want. I won't stop you. But I am done sacrificing my daughter's emotional safety to protect Tyler from consequences." She struggled to speak through her tears. "You don't understand. Tyler is fragile right now. He's hurting." "So is Sophie," I said. "The difference is her pain wasn't self-inflicted." Mom's breath hitched. "I have to go," she whispered and hung up. I stared at the phone for a long moment. Then I exhaled. The world didn't end. The house didn't collapse. The sky didn't fall. I simply felt free. That afternoon, after school, Sophie came home with new drawings. Her and me. Her and Daniel. Her with a ship. Broken, then whole again. One picture caught my eye. The ship had a bright gold plaque glued beneath it. I knelt beside her. "What's this, sweetheart?" She held up the real plaque, the one Daniel had engraved. gently rubbing the dented corner with her thumb. I want to make a new ship someday, she said softly. With you. Maybe not the same, but something we build together, and this can go on it. My throat tightened. Her eyes were sad but steady. Bright. Resilient. Brave. Just like her dad knew she'd be. I cupped her cheek. We will, I whispered. We'll build something beautiful. Something no one will ever take away from you again. She nodded, leaning into my hand. Then, after a moment, Mom? Yes, baby? Is Uncle Tyler still part of our family? I chose my words carefully. Family isn't just who you're related to, I said. Family is who treats you with love and respect and kindness. So until he learns how to do that, we're giving him space. She thought about that, then nodded. Good. That night, after she went to bed, I set the plaque on my desk and traced the letters again. For my brave Captain Sophie. Sail toward your dreams. Love always, Dad. We would build something new, something strong, something worthy of her courage. And for the first time since Daniel died, I felt like I was finally steering our life in the right direction, toward a future where Sophie learned how to protect herself, how to set boundaries, how to demand respect, and how to walk away from toxic people, from manipulation, from excuses that come disguised as love. A future where she would grow up knowing you never have to let someone keep hurting you just because they share your blood. That was the real inheritance I wanted to give her. That was the lesson Daniel would have wanted her to learn. And that was the karma Tyler earned all on his own.